Good morning, everyone. Good to see a decent audience here. So we're going to take on the impossible task of wrapping up IBC in the next hour and a half. So if you've missed IBC, if you've just arrived, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll feel as if you've not missed anything. But it's going to be a challenge for my panel to give you the flavor of everything in such a short period of time. So this session is called IBC 2017 Key Trends and Takeaways. Before we start, we are going to be using the audience sort of participation and questioning system. So if you've got a question that you want to ask our panel, please do use your IBC app and select the forum within that and place your questions. Now, if previous sessions is anything to go by, there are going to be absolutely more questions than we can handle. So the key thing is, not only do you need to ask questions, but it's important that you also give your likes to the questions that you see in the app, because I will inevitably be choosing the questions that rise to the top and the ones that seem to be the most popular. So invite you to ask questions through the app, but also invite you to review the questions that you see there and like them so that we know which ones we should be prioritizing in the available time. This is an interesting, really interesting IBC. Of course, they're all interesting, but I feel this is more than most. It's 50 years of IBC, and you can probably tell just by looking at me, I've been to quite a few of the IBCs over the years, but I promise you not all 50 of them. But I think this is one of the significant years because I'm detecting, and we'll hear from our panel if they feel the same, I'm detecting the pace of change is increasing dramatically, and the changes that we're experiencing, in a sense, are like no other. So let's see if that plays out during the session this morning. So, very simple agenda for you. I've taken the chairman's privilege of raising a few issues that I think are important in an opening presentation, but we'll then move on to the panel discussion. It'll be interesting to see if my panel either agree that I've hit the right topics or in the right way, or whether or not they feel that I've missed some of the important issues. My presentation will be more questions than answers, I have to say. And then, of course, we'll move on to the audience questions and comments, which is where you play your part with Slido. So, what is this all about? What are the highlights of IBC? What are the most talked about trends in our industry? I've given the panel a fairly liberal interpretation of at IBC. Hopefully, IBC's captured all the major trends, but if it's anything been missing, I've given the panel the opportunity to raise that as well. But I think, as I said at the beginning, this is quite a pivotal year, and so I'd like to not just look at where we are today, what's happened at IBC, but if we have time, I'd like to look forward, because I've got a feeling that things are going to change very rapidly over the next 5 to 10 years. But having said that, we've got a conference. Lots of good stuff come out in the conference, and lots of great ideas, technology, innovations, new ways of working on the floor. So finally, if we have time, we could also get on to how has IBC worked for you. So I've got a great panel for you this morning, and I've carefully selected them so that you can have a cross-section of experience and background. So let me first introduce them. Ed Border is the Research Director at Ampere Analysis. Next to him, Kate Bulkley, who's a media commentator and journalist, and by the way, is also one of the major architects of the IBC conference itself. Simon Fell is Director of Technology and Innovation at the EBU. And how many broadcasters do you represent, Simon?
73.
73. So there's a good start from the broadcast point of view. Next to Simon is Kip Schauer. He's the Global Head of Media and Entertainment for Google Cloud at Google, of course. And Niko Waesche is Head of Customer and Audience Activation at GfK. So I think you can already sense a broad spectrum of experience from my team. A few key words that have come across my consciousness, if you like: monetization, increased productivity, automation, personalization, and fragmentation. Perhaps I should have done a word field, because that would have perhaps served the purpose better, but these are some of the words that have come up into my consciousness. I said this is a major change, and one of the reasons I've said that is because throughout my career I've seen changes, of course, lots of very dramatic changes, but they've tended to affect one aspect of our industry and one area. It might be production, or it might be post-production, or it might be transmission. But what we're seeing now, I feel, is a change that is affecting all aspects, from content creation through to delivery to the viewer. Arguably, we're seeing a stronger, perhaps, segmentation between packaged programming, the production of programming, and live content and the distribution of it. I'd see it sort of becoming compartmentalized to a certain extent. Slightly controversial aspect I've heard raised here, it was a question asked that, are you prepared to pay more for your technology in return for improved efficiency, perhaps reduced headcount, or perhaps more positively, the ability to do more with the same headcount? That's a trend that I feel I've seen. Something else that I'll be asking my panel is program quality or picture quality no longer taking center stage at IBC? Because actually one could argue that quality is being taken more for granted, that as we've gone through standard definition, high definition, through to UHD, for example, we've got as far as we need to go. A focus on what it does and how it does it, a little less focus perhaps on the underlying technology. Do we need to know how this processor works or that processor works? What we're more interested in, what will it do for me and my business? So this actually lends itself to saying, perhaps we're a bit more now in a technology-enabled environment rather than a technology-driven. Technology is giving us options. Now we have to make intelligent choices about what options we take up and which ones are going to be right for our business, which ones are going to deliver efficiency. Yeah, so coming back to that question of picture quality, UHD and 4K is now commonplace. There were previous shows where people would go out of their way to proudly show that they have UHD, and every booth would center stage, they would say, we've got UHD, and it's now, I think, taken much more for granted. But those of you who've had a chance to see the trend not only in distribution but in production, the move to IT, I sense there's been a bit of a wait for the IT production systems to come into place before making huge investments in UHD enterprises, because IT production systems are likely to facilitate the management of all these multiple formats all the way up to UHD. But there's no doubt that the getting more ambitious with picture quality is also driving the need for more processing power, more storage capacity. I suppose another question we could ask ourselves, and maybe some of the answers have come out here at IBC, is there any merit in going even further than current UHD at 4K? And perhaps we're awaiting some innovative reasons why we should consider going to the next step, or have we reached the law of diminishing returns? So getting back to this theme of IT and IP, we're starting to see the standards in place for the production environment for IT and IP systems. And indeed, if you've not had a chance to drop in, please do drop into the interop zone, which is supported by IABM and AIMS. IABM is the organization I also work for. And it's showing 30+ suppliers showing the evidence of progress in IP-based systems. But it's more than just IT. It opens the door to more automation. We've heard a lot more about artificial intelligence because we're working in the data environment more. We can make better use of artificial intelligence for automation. But another question I'll be asking the panel is this just a stepping stone to the cloud? We're getting these IT and IP standards for the production environment, but actually is the end game moving all this technology into the cloud? That's all the professional end. We need to touch upon the consumer environment. And clearly, if you've been to any of the conference sessions, or if I'm sure some of the booths are also promoting the fact that there is a sea change in the consumption of video. And that change means, I'm sure there's data around that says people are now watching more online video than they're watching conventional, traditional broadcast. And again, there's that generation gap again where the trends are different depending upon the generation. But the fact is, I'm hearing at this IBC that still broadcast generates the revenue. But okay, that's where we are today, but are the signs that it's on the path to a slow, maybe ultimate decline? And once we find ways of monetizing online video in a more healthy way, perhaps the end or the vision of online is much clearer. Clearly, there's an increasing use of analytics and personalization, and that leads to the need from a consumer management of consumer business, finding new and innovative ways to derive those business insights. I'm also interested to find out the positioning of big brands, because we're used to big brands dominating the environment, being the leaders or the drivers. But there is also a lot more fragmentation. The lowering of costs of technology is democratizing it in a way. So on the one hand, big brands are still important, but we're seeing democratization of technology, which means smaller players can have a greater influence. There's a whole list of and alsos, I guess, but virtual reality. It really was hot at IBC 2016. There's no judgment in this statement. I'll be interested to know what the feeling is from our panel about virtual reality this year at IBC. And the Internet of Things. We think ourselves as an industry with a walled garden. We know broadcast and media defines for us where we are. But are we now going to be overlapping more with a bigger picture, with the Internet of Things, which inevitably is going to be, video is going to be a huge part of it. And we're watching on the train, the bus, and we're probably even now going to be watching video whilst we're driving or not driving our autonomous car. IBC is hot on the cinema industry, big budget productions, the highest image standards. Let's see what's new in that area. And I've touched upon it before, is traditional broadcasting still relevant? And is the last bastion of broadcasting the live events? But then there's a cost issue as well. Cybersecurity, are we protected as we go more and more into the IP world? Artificial intelligence, again, that for me has come up a lot at this IBC. And perhaps more on the editorial side of things, fake news. How do we know now what is real? Sometimes fake news, once it goes viral, you see it everywhere, so you start to believe it. Social media and live video, lots of moves in terms of competing with regular broadcast by putting live events out through social media. User experience, is there technology fatigue amongst end users? And as I said before, is there a generation game? Are we seeing two groups, those who are traditionalists and those who are looking at the new generation of technology? So I hope I've asked more questions than I've given answers, because it's my panel's job here to provide some of the answers. So I'm going to start by asking each of them one by one to tell me whether or not some of the things I've said in that opening presentation resonate with them. Have I missed something? And what was hot for them? So Ed, why don't you lead off with what you found at IBC?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, I would say that one of the kind of main things that I've seen at this show is the sort of transition, which has been happening over the last few years, from kind of you'd come to IBC and the focus would be on hardware, and that sort of transition towards, I think, more software. And now the next stage then is that software going into the cloud and how that sort of automates different processes. So I think we've sort of been seeing this happening. I'd say personalization happening as part of that, particularly with regards to the data that broadcasters are sitting on. I've been hearing a lot about that this year. Particularly, I think, because there's a sense that data has been undervalued in this industry. Obviously, for some companies, data, particularly digital ones, data is the foundation of a lot of their business model, whereas actually in this industry, it's something which has only recently been paid advantage to. And what you're seeing is almost every element of the broadcast chain trying to collect more data and offer analytics on it, but then you're not getting any unification or any sort of rationalization of that data, so it's actually still very hard to use. So it's obviously something that tends to happen a lot in our industry. Everyone in the different pieces of the chain takes their piece or their pick of the pie, and then you end up with a sort of a difficult, fragmented supply chain. So that's certainly been, for me, a couple of the kind of big things that I've been seeing.
Actually, when you say data, you've just reminded me that, again, a year or two ago, one of the buzzwords was big data. Mm-hmm. Do we just call it data now? Is that the same thing now? Has big data just become data?
Big data, I think, is a non-protected term that can be used very loosely, depending on what context you come across it in the show. But certainly the kind of data that you'd be collecting at high frequency from an audience would classify as big data. But again, we've seen that this year as well. So machine learning, AI, there's been a lot of talk about it. I think at this stage, the talk probably outweighs the number of solutions, but I think obviously as we do automate more and we're collecting more data, it naturally leads us towards how can we personalize what we personalize by trying to sort of analyze what's happening, and machine learning is a very good way of working out hidden rules to work out what consumers want or how we can profile them. So I think we will naturally head more and more that way. I think what we're seeing at the moment is the first tentative steps in that direction.
So when you say data in the generic sense, and hearing what you said there, are you saying that, in a sense, personalization is the sweet spot of the output of analyzing some of that data?
So there are several end goals, right? So at the moment, it's largely been used for service. So data has been collected and analyzed to monitor the network and how data and how video is delivered to consumers. The next stage is around the user experience itself, so the quality of experience. So can you personalize what people are viewing? Can you change the UI so that it reflects how users are actually using it? Can you push content? Can you, in fact, make your content rights deals better because you're analyzing what people are watching and building up a kind of library or an image of how they are? And then the final stage is advertising, which I'm sure we'll touch on, but the kind of Valhalla or the holy grail of a lot of this personalization is the idea, okay, can we actually increase revenues by more targeting and personalizing our advertising? But that's a little, I think, further down the line.
Okay, very good. Kate?
Well, just picking up on what Ed said, I mean, data or big data, whatever we're calling it, it's certainly something that I think the broadcasters are starting to really get with the program and understand that they have to not only collect this stuff, but actually understand it, and that's going to be basically the difference between surviving and not surviving. And if you look at what I did this week, one of the keynotes was with Brian Sullivan, who's from Fox, and he is in charge of sort of user experience. He's the guy that's been launching Fox Now, which is their over-the-top offer, which is now live in the States, and one would assume will be coming to the rest of the world at some point. And what he says is, the data that we're getting from that is just, streets ahead of what we're able to get in terms of granularity and useful data from what we've been getting as sort of regular legacy broadcasters. So I think that data, yes, is a very big one. I think other ones for me, I just think social media, just the whole socializing of what's going on is just a huge theme that's happened. Certainly in most of the talks that I've seen in the conference and talking to people on the floor, everyone's talking about social. How do you work with Facebook? How do you, make sure you protect yourself from Facebook? How do you work with Google? What do you do with YouTube? How do you monetize? Again, Brian Sullivan was very outspoken when I asked him about Facebook, and he said, I'm not really sure how you monetize on Facebook. And when you talk about Facebook Watch, which of course is what we also heard a presentation from Dan Danker, who came and sort of unveiled Facebook Watch, which if you don't know what that is, it's been up, I don't know, I guess about a month now, and it's basically video, Facebook putting longer form video on Facebook. There's actually a tab for it. Will this upend the broadcasting business? We don't know, but of course Brian Sullivan, and he would say this being at Fox, says, I don't see people watching really long-form content on Facebook. They might watch 3 seconds, they might watch 30 seconds, are they going to watch 20 minutes, are they going to watch half-hour episodes? Don't know. Right. But that's sort of interesting to me. So the whole social side, I think, is important. And then I won't go on forever, but the one other thing I would say is that I think, and you sort of mentioned it, sort of AI, and how this all is working is very interesting. We had a very, certainly one of the best attended sessions was the Sophia the robot with Hanson Robotics. There's lots of people here taking pictures, and she was talking on the stage and interacting with the presenter, and I was talking to the presenter afterwards, Louise, and I said, was that scripted? And she says, no, I was just talking. It was really weird. She was like reacting in real time to what I was saying. At one time, if you were there, at one moment, Sophia got mad at Louisa because she was angry, and Louisa thought, what did I say? It was something about musical choice. Anyway, she's like a year old, but of course she looks like anyways. Where is robotics going?
Right.
Who knows? Is it going to change our world? Who knows? But I'll tell you, voice activation and all that kind of stuff, it's going to put the AI to it's going to bury the UI. Right. UI, user interfaces, forget it. It's all going to be voice. It's all going to be
more importantly, it happened here first at IBC, the robot and so on. So that's good. But Kate, now I will also ask Simon this question. You emphasize social media. From a broadcast and media perspective, very often they've been treated as silos, the broadcast and the social media. Do you get a sense that they are overlapping? Presumably things like Facebook Live is an indicator of that.
Oh, definitely. They are parking their tanks on our lawn.
Yeah.
No question about it. Why? Because video is sticky, right?
Yes.
What's the best thing that's going to get people to stay on their sites? Yeah. Video. The man from Google can tell us that. Yes. This is not a great secret. So I think, that's definitely they're coming. Just like music was the first thing, this is the next thing.
So, you're the best person to represent the broadcast side of the industry, Simon. So let's have your take on this.
So, can you hear me? Is this on?
Yes.
It's on. Yep. It's on.
You're good.
Well, I think the fact that Facebook are investing money in production, and also Apple have announced that they're investing money in production as well, indicates how great it is to have content. $1 billion each. Yeah. Nothing compared to what Netflix have invested. But nevertheless, broadcasters invest that every year. All over the world in different countries, and what we find is that what they would actually like to have on their platforms is the content of our broadcasters, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, there's a sort of symbiotic relationship building with social media where we promote and use the tools to attract people to our content, and mainly back to our news channels in particular. At the same time, there's this big debate about fake news, which you referred to briefly. Certainly within the EBU, we've got the Eurovision News Exchange, which brings stories all over the world from partners as well as our own members. And what we've got there is a fact-checking service as well. And many of the members are developing fact-checking services. No one's quite clear yet, which thing is right. But it's been for years now they've been saying, we can't verify this, but we believe these pictures are real. Right. That's getting harder and harder to identify, and you need many, many sources to clarify this. But I think it's an opportunity and a threat for broadcasters because many broadcasters are producers of content. If they feel they want to make programs for those platforms, they can do so.
Right.
But in a way, they have to, don't they, Simon? Because, I mean, mobile is the other big trend we haven't actually mentioned yet, but it's all about mobile, right? I mean, I know the figure that I have in my brain, and I think it was something that the Facebook guy said, but I think it's true. He says 50% of mobile data traffic right now is video. You probably know this, Ed. And 75%, he says, will be video by 2020. I mean, that's huge. So if you're a broadcaster, you have to get on those devices. You have to figure out how to make your content work there.
I think we do. I mean, but there's for example, statistics from the BBC, which are probably about a year or two old now, but were that, you know, only 6% of their content was viewed online. So let's put it in perspective. Yes, it's a lot of views are created, and maybe it's not just their content, it's YouTube and other things, but you know, that costs them 15% of the distribution bill. So I think you have to be careful, you know, what you wish for, because broadcast is very efficient, and you get a big show, you get big numbers instantly. You don't have to wait. There's no buffering.
Yeah. So Simon, you're probably the best person on the panel to answer the earlier question. That I know that broadcasters, until recently, have had different departments for the broadcast and for the social media and so on.
Yeah.
This IBC, around this time, are we starting to see the ability to bring those groups together and work more efficiently rather than having them working in silos?
Yeah, you do. I've visited a broadcaster in Denmark not long ago, and they were telling me that they were bringing that sort of social and online work into their main master control room, because it was now every bit as important as what they were doing on normal TV and radio. So that is something we're seeing more and more of, and people refer to it as digital transformation, which is a bit odd for me because I've been transformed many years ago. That's the phrase they're using, and I don't think people quite know what it means, but it's being applied in our industry throughout the organisation.
Yeah. Sure. Anything else for the moment, or should we come back
well, I mean,
to you
you
later?
mentioned the AI and cloud and machine learning. I think the interesting thing there is that machine learning is probably more relevant at the moment. I think AI and machine learning get mixed up quite a lot. And I think the AI part is a bit like a toddler that doesn't quite know what to do.
Right.
And it probably needs all of our content to teach it what to do.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot to be learned from each other in that respect. And it offers automation, it offers workflows which can be processed in new ways, subtitling, transcription, that kind of thing, I think is wonderful opportunities. But again, which cloud do you go into? Because once you're in, can you get out? You know, because you end up being dependent on one or the other. And if somebody's got a better tool for this, what do you do? Do you send some of your work that way? So I think broadcasters are also interested in their own systems, and we've developed with our members by using software developers from different broadcasters to work together in a team, our own personalization platform, which personalizes based on what public service broadcasters want to do, not necessarily on commercial aspects, but more on, you know, this is great from the archive. If you like this on TV, you might like that on radio, or you might like this online. We've actually got a very broad spectrum of knowledge once people start to use these platforms.
Yeah. In fact, it is at this IBC, and I have to confess I don't understand the details of it, but I've heard at a number of sessions the talk of the way you can package what you put in the cloud that makes it transportable if you do want to move between clouds. Maybe Kip can sort of comment on a bit more on that.
I'd like to ask him if he could produce an inter-cloud transfer fee. Maybe we could have one in January every year. You could have a sort of limit and say you must transfer by this date, or that's like the Premier League. You know?
So Kip, that's a
tax-free transfer
trade,
between all the clouds. So trends for me, obviously identified all these. I think in the cloud, what's interesting is you know, you walk around and you see all the different tools that you need to be able to consume as a broadcaster. And I think cloud, as Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, the big clouds continue to get larger, that they're becoming that platform where what broadcasters and people are looking at are the tools being built on top of it. And that's still the focus. And like we're talking about here, if you can move between clouds, and I think there are technologies coming out that are allowing, you know, little microservices. I'm running one microservice on one cloud. I have another microservice on another cloud. The data going back and forth is oftentimes that challenge, right? Because clouds, you can get it in really, really easy, right? But trying to get it back out, that's obvious. That's their stickiness, right, with egress fees. But I think there's going to be more pressure on that to be able to lower that. And then you will be able to jump between clouds. So I think from a platform as a service, that's what we're going to see the big clouds. But you're really looking at what are the applications doing. Machine learning obviously is very, very exciting. I think we're at the beginning of that. Walking around the show, you've seen some of the smaller companies take the machine learning and integrate it into their product. I saw a great implementation of a lot of broadcasters. You might have 50 years or 75 years of content. Somebody probably put metadata or some indexing on it originally. But what if you can now run that through machine learning? It's now all indexed, and you can start to monetize it by being able to find the right content, try to get, you know, if I'm interested in content and I start to search for it, will I find your content because you have better metadata? And then I think monetization is the last interesting one that I think is going to go through some radical changes. Ads are becoming very, you know, you're trying to watch a little video on your phone or wherever you're watching it. Ads are popping up all over. They're blocking areas. So I think there's going to be some different changes. I don't know what they are, but how people are going to be able to monetize these other than just putting ads and trying to get people to click on that video content itself. And then the last one that I think is interesting is a generational gap. Is it technology and the way the kids consume it? I have a couple boys that are teenagers. I have one that built a computer and he has 2 monitors, and somehow he always has a video playing on one monitor while he's supposed to be doing homework, but he's probably playing a game and things like that. But that constant feed of video is always going on, and what he watches it can be very specific, and he'll even pay sometimes to get a live stream of, he's into paintball. I don't know how popular that is in Europe, but they actually will stream it, and he can pay $5 a month and watch professional paintball. You would never have been able to do that even a few years ago, right? So technology, by creating new content, is allowing people to view what they want, and then it's that monetization that's going to allow us to keep having people be able to create that content. So.
I guess we all have our anecdotal stories about our kids, and mine is that mine are coming up to 30 and they've never had an aerial in their lives. They've never used one. They wouldn't know what to do with it if they had one. So it's
and the other one on that is they love the binge watching. Absolutely, right? They will go downstairs and watch it on the big TV, you know, the whole series of something. But they don't, the live TV, that's where they just don't seem to grasp that concept.
I think monetization is a big one.
It is,
and that's we should talk more probably about that. But certainly what I thought was really interesting when Brian Sullivan was again talking, I'm talking a lot about Brian Sullivan, he said, you know, what's interesting is we changed. There's a big bundle, right, that everybody wanted and was willing to spend whatever was $100+ for. And then suddenly Netflix came along and sort of blew the bundle up, and everyone went, well, actually, why am I paying for stuff that I don't actually watch? So we had this big poof-boom. And he says, you know, this is great. We're now in a world where the consumer is now first again. But, you know, what's happened to the, you know, the $10 Netflix and the $100 big bundle? Where's the missing $90? He says, you know, how do we monetize that missing $90? And if we don't figure that out, what's going to happen to content creation, premium content creation, not UGC content, but premium content creation. So I think you're right. Monetization is really key. And how do you actually find those audiences, whether it's paintball or manga or, you know, Premier League football? You know, you know, how do you find them and how do you monetize them? And I think we're still really at the beginning of that journey. That's still problematic.
I agree, and I think eventually we'll be back to some bundles, right? Because you want to pay $5 here, $10 here, 15 there to get all your specialized content, and then somebody's going to go, oh wait, I can go aggregate for this, and we'll be back to bundles at some point.
I think.
So let me move to you, Niko. And normally one might be nervous because you're the last in the line, but I know you're going to come from a different angle. You won't find they've said everything you want to say.
Well, I think that we need to think out of the box even more. And I've been super excited by this year's IBC. I think it's been an extremely exciting event, and you can just see that we're almost like in this train, right? And every IBC, the train is going faster and faster and gaining momentum. But while we look at the train now, we can't even recognize it anymore as a train because the media industry is not the media industry anymore. The media industry is e-commerce. The media industry is finance. The media industry is all kinds of things that we wouldn't even have thought would have been at an IBC even just last year even. So for me, I think, John, you asked the question, what will the IBC be like in 5 or 10 years? We have the 50th anniversary this year of the IBC. You didn't ask what will the IBC be like in 50 years.
Right.
But let's stick to 5 to 10.
Yes, please.
Let's stick to 5 to 10. So I think 2 media companies will be successful, or media companies will be successful only if they do 2 things right. One is great content, and the other one is great data. Now, the scary thing is that it's not just media companies that have great content or great data. If we're looking at the cloud, everybody can create great content these days, right? I mean, look at brands, and any kind of players we didn't even imagine would come into this space. Using cloud, using these new technologies, anybody can create great content. And great data, I mean, I think that there is a very important discussion about walled gardens and about the data that companies like Facebook, Amazon, Alibaba have. And that is a very, very important discussion. And these platforms, globally scaled platforms, of course, have massive data advantages compared to anybody else. However, they're not the only ones that have data. E-commerce companies have data. Financial companies have data. Payment systems have very, very interesting data. What's the data that the media companies have? Do they have enough? Does it really tell them something about their audiences? So there's a huge amount of things that have to happen in that space as well. If we'll be still talking about media in 5 to 10 years, or we'll be talking about something completely different.
And I hope you don't mind me asking this, because you haven't raised it, but advertising, and we heard about monetization, and this links into advertising. I know you're very much into personalizing advertising. That's getting more money out of an existing base, isn't it? Because if you don't waste your time advertising to people who are not interested and you personalize it, is that not a way forward of getting more money out of an existing viewer base?
Sure. So I think the important thing is here that we're not talking about programmatic anymore. We're talking about activation.
Right.
And why is that? That's because the data that we have today about audiences won't just be used for more precise targeting. It will be used for many different purposes. Right. So it's about reaching the right people also at the right point in time when they actually have an interest. Yeah. So I know that, for example, a company like Heineken is very, very interested, not just reaching, let's say, a specific target group, but also reaching the right people exactly when they would buy a Heineken at exactly the right point in time. So the ad tech space allows that in the future, especially as we move more and more towards mobile and we have location data and we have all kinds of other data. But secondly, activation can also mean creative content, optimized content. So different ads for different people shown at different points in time. And this will also activate the content industry, because we're basically not just going to create one ad anymore, we're going to create potentially hundreds of ads, and artificial intelligence will play into that as well.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that. So let's go freeform now. And one of the things that I dread in this question is I'm going to ask if anyone's noticed anything on the floor of particular note. And sometimes I get the answer, well, I haven't had time to go onto the floor. So does anyone have something from the floor that's caught your eye whilst wandering around?
I think there were just a couple. I didn't get a lot of time, of course, but the companies that have taken either the machine learning or the AI and started to integrate it into their products. Saw a couple really interesting ones with the speech to text, and then being able to use that text to do something with it. And then also I already mentioned about starting to run it through the video intelligence APIs to create more metadata, and then being able to search that metadata. So those 2 areas were exciting to see, right? Because when we think AI or ML, we're thinking about the big cloud companies, but we're really creating that technology so the smaller companies can take it and figure out how to make it consumable for this industry.
Right. Simon, let me be more specific then, because I know this is an area you're interested in. IP and the production environment, there's the IP showcase, which is a backroom demonstration, that's fine. Is it starting to appear on the floor, IP and production?
I think it is.
Because the IP, it was full of people the whole time. That room was absolutely bursting with people.
Guess what? Technology still drives things,
Hey.
But it's, at the base of it all, that technology is groundbreaking stuff in that we're
it's IP now.
getting, I think it's 50 manufacturers brought together in the room. And we've got this joint technology for Network Media Group, which we're part of, which has been developing this roadmap. And if you look at the roadmap, which is on the wall as you go in that room, you can see it goes out to 2020 at the moment. And one of the things that's talked about in there is the next generation of dematerialization, which is a French word, which was the only one we could come up with to invent what this is. And it's basically, it's more than virtualization. It's basically taking whole lumps of your production and sticking it out there in the virtualized space, whether that's a private cloud or a public cloud, if it's fast enough. And I think this whole IP revolution, which will be, and the foundation of it will be the SMPTE standard, which is coming out imminently, the 2110. Once that's out, many manufacturers have bet the farm on that one. So, you know, basically that has to work. And this interoperability is about making that happen, improving what works and what doesn't work. Right. But this is the foundation for, as I said, the big studios that are redeveloping. We've got members that are building studios now, have built them now, who've almost too early for 2110, but have considered it in their design and can add it in. Others are just about to start on the journey, and they're designing flexible workspaces with new workflows, new ways of working. And it's important that we bring that flexibility in the workplace because the people we're employing are different. You know, they come in with knowledge of Facebook and things of that nature, and the tools that they use are just whatever they can get from open source software, and they put together things that would amaze you in terms of what they can achieve. So there is a new generation coming, and this IP infrastructure will allow the flexibility to allow them to thrive, and we'll get some real benefits that we don't know of yet from this technology. I mean, you can produce something for the web 1 minute and 4K drama the next in the same space at your desk if you want to. And I think that flexibility is what we're seeing, especially in news. We're seeing it already. Swedish Radio on our booth with their NXG radio system, which is where they've used IP technology and audio to free up their systems around the country. They've got 100 backpacks out with journalists, and they've got a remote studio now where all the gubbins is in a data center somewhere. Everything's done with IP protocols. And that just shows you what can be achieved. And I think it opens the door to the future. There's some of the things like object-based production, etc. I don't mean object-based audio, but video. And I think that we don't really know yet what's going to come. And hopefully these infrastructures will stand the test of time and be flexible and scalable.
I mean, I can't deny that the focus is on IT, and because that is the next, you call it driving, I would say enabling technology. But if I generalize a bit more, as I said in my presentation, I don't sense so much that people at IBC are fascinated purely by picture quality or the underlying technology. I sense as I go around that people want to say, what's it going to do for me a bit more? What do you think as a panel? You feel
I agree with you. I think people need flexible workspace. They need flexible tools that allow them to be on the web 1 minute, on mobile the next, and on the TV news another. I mean, a lot of people are doing now newsroom facilities where if you're in the newsroom and something happens, you go on the web immediately from your desk almost, or you even stand up at a stand-up desk and you self-drive an interview with you. Say you'd walk in, we put the lights on, we control it. It's just the presenter driving the whole thing. And that is really powerful stuff, and it's changing the way and the flexibility we have in the newsroom. So that's going to happen more and more and more. And people are looking for tools that make this possible, whether it's the cloud or machine learning, whatever.
Let's move on to, I mean, I think, Kate, you said we need to talk a bit more about monetization because that's a major theme.
Can I say one thing first? So something that you just spurred when you were talking. I mean, one of the things I noticed was that like we had a lot of sports sessions.
Yes.
And you know, you think of sports as being, because you were talking about high quality video, you think of sports as wanting the best high quality video, and they do. But what I thought was really interesting is they had Alicia Klein from the IAAF, who was the Athletics Association.
We work with them.
Right. And she was saying, you know, we cannot rely on television anymore. You know, we can't rely on what she called the passive television experience, because the younger people who we want to get involved with watching athletics or whatever aren't watching television. So we have to be able to move this content onto different platforms. And then the fellow from the English Football League, which is sort of under the EPL. He was saying, you know, same thing. They've started an over-the-top service. So it kind of gets into not only are they thinking differently about, not that they want to get rid of the high-quality pictures on the television, but they have to think about this other thing too. And that's the growing business, and that's the thing that they're focusing on. I thought that was really interesting.
So we're doing a lot of work sporting federations to provide them with social media content, whether it's UEFA or anybody else. And they're really interested in it because we can make that video and multimedia content available to them. And also gathering data at sporting events is a big issue as well in terms of enriching the experience.
Right.
You know, I mean, things like Watson doing automatic editing of a tennis match, for example, that's one way to do it. But I mean, they've got all the data on the ball movement, the players, where they are, and all that data can be fed into their system. It's quite clever.
So, Kate, thanks for that, because maybe we'll change tack a bit and come back to this. You mentioned generation, and Niko, you may have some observations on this. As the new generation of viewers work through the system, is traditional broadcast going to become less significant? Is it a slow decline for traditional broadcast?
I'm not really sure whether we're actually thinking of broadcasting anymore. I mean, we really have to see where the audience is, right?
Yeah.
And we have to engage with audiences wherever they are. So one of those means might be broadcasting, but the more direct access you have to your audiences, the better data you can collect about them, and the more you can monetize, right? So you'll be able to show them more personalized ads, which will allow you to receive higher CPMs. You can show them more personalized content, which will tie them more into your service, reduce your churn rates. So everything is about direct access and having that data. So you know, and the players out there know that, right? For example, the football clubs. So they're all launching their own OTT or SVOD services. Now, the challenge with that is, you know, you can't have dozens and dozens and dozens of SVOD and OTT services. Some of those are ghost towns today, right? I mean, they're, you know, they look really great, but who's actually there, right? They're all on Amazon, they're all on Netflix. So that's kind of the challenge, is how do you establish that direct access to the audience? Because if you lose it, you have to go through somebody else who you have to give some kind of revenue to. I mean, for me,
and that somebody else might be Facebook or Amazon. That's
exactly,
the thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So one of the most interesting discussions that I noticed at the IBC this year was a discussion about these two German initiatives, Veremi, where Axel Springer is involved, one of the largest German formerly print publishers, and the other one is the Pro7 Alliance with an e-commerce company. And both of those are trying to set up these shared data systems where they share data about their audiences in order for each of the players to actually have you know, greater insights into their audience than they would have otherwise, in order to then establish an alternative system to Facebook or Google. So that's very, very interesting to see where that's going to go.
Okay. Thanks, Niko. We're starting to get the questions in. Do vote on them. I don't see a lot of voting yet, so I've got a lot of questions. I'm not quite sure which ones to go to, because so do get to give your likes on them.
The other thing I would say is that, and you could probably weigh in on this, you know, you track who's watching, you know, what content where, right? So who is watching what content where? Are you starting to see a lot more content going onto these OTT platforms, and where do you see this happening? Because I mean, that's a big shift.
Of course. And actually also just to go back 1 second in terms of what we were discussing from, you know, will broadcasts, you know, sort of be a factor. I mean, one of the...
Well, I took Niko's comments as a yes, it is in decline, but...
Yeah, of course. But I guess also in some sense, is that relevant? Because, you know, if you're accessing content in 5 years' time, there will still be a need for some notion of broadcast, or 10 years' time. But if that is over IP and the technologies keep developing for multicasting to a lot of people, so people want to simultaneously watch something live, to a degree, that's still broadcast. We may not call it traditional broadcast, but it's all about the fact that, you know, if you wanted to reach a niche audience, you'd still have to do it by reaching everyone, and then your niche audience would just watch a channel that may not be viewed as much. But now, through OTT, you can unicast and reach a single person or send a single stream. That means that you can therefore target specific audiences. Your SVOD platforms are effectively your channels, if you like. You know, rather than having a packaged channel, you have an SVOD platform which acts as a channel for a group of content. And then you aggregate your new channels in your new broadcast system. The difference is how you're delivering it, and sort of, you know, then ultimately how you monetize it. But I feel like there's a kind of inversion where we come back to a not dissimilar model in the end, where, you know, your different OTT platforms become your channels. Your channels are picked almost a la carte within some sort of aggregator. We see in Amazon channels now, where Amazon channels effectively allows you to pick and choose relatively cheap OTT services in your own bundle, so to speak. So, yeah, when I hear things like, is traditional broadcast, I guess the traditional bit's the key bit. There's still some sort of notion of, if you want to watch a live sporting event, you're kind of broadcasting.
And it's a broadcast, whichever way it's delivered.
Broadcast, quote unquote, however you...
There's a slight problem with that, which is that you're all talking about niche channels launching on many, many different VOD platforms, and you mentioned the tumbleweed blowing through the internet in places. It's fragmentation, the word you put on
Yeah.
list earlier. You know, there's a damn sight to be said for turning on the TV and going to that news channel or that TV
Yes.
channel. And people still like to do that. People like something called serendipity. I mean, in one of the algorithms that we've developed with our team for personalization, one of them is diversity, which has surprised me. Give me something that isn't targeted at me.
Yeah.
You know, tell me something that maybe other people like me kind of have looked at, but I haven't.
Yeah.
Give me something interesting.
Surprise me. Yeah.
Surprise me.
Yeah.
We
Surprise
get
me,
all
yeah.
the time on
Serendipity.
TV.
We don't want
Yes.
serendipity to die.
We don't.
Serendipity is
Yeah.
quite important,
That's a key
actually.
algorithm. And the other question I have for all this cloud stuff is, who owns the algorithm and what does it do this week and what will it do next week? Because
Right.
I have no control over it. So if the algorithm turns out great data for me this week, in a month's time it might be turned another way because some commercial influence might have decided it needs to do this or it needs
Yeah.
Facebook.
But I guess
Sorry.
there's a difference there between the data and how you process it
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
If you've got raw data, you can infer from it what you need.
Yeah.
But if someone else does the processing for you, then you
You
can't
talked
do
about
that.
sharing data. Not everybody wants to share data. I mean, most of the big platforms want, I will have the data,
Yeah.
thank you very much. If you've got a commercial relationship with them, maybe you'll get your bit, but you know, only to the extent they need to tell you about it. So I think that's why broadcasters are pretty interested in having access to the audience themselves. You'll see lots of our broadcasters doing sign-on now.
Yeah.
And single sign-on leads to the next issue, which is the EU regulation next year on GDPR.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you've got to be very careful with that.
So one of the challenges of this session is that we've got to cover the full spectrum of IBC. So as chairman, I've somehow got to stop us getting stuck on one area.
monitors
So you guys have been very helpful. And a couple of the questions have really risen to the top. One of them is addressed to you. The top one is addressed to you, but I want everyone to give us some comment. And it's something I've missed, 5G.
5G.
The influence of telecoms. That wasn't on my list, and that was missing.
Well, we talked about mobile, so we have. It's
That's
not like
true.
we haven't mentioned.
But Simon,
But go
5G,
ahead.
it has been raised a lot.
Okay, so look in today's Daily News. There's an article by Darko Ratkai who works for us. He's working with us very closely on this, and many of our members work with us, and we've been into 3GPP for the last 2 years, trying to get broadcasters' requirements into their consideration.
Yeah.
And their process is a very complex process, and we've managed to do it with LT Release 14, which is the next version coming out. It's not 5G, it's along the way to 5G. And there are many features in there, such as you can do free-to-air. You don't have to buy a SIM card to make a service work. You can do a large region, like 60-kilometer regions. And these are all technical things to do with the way the radio works, but it allows for broadcast-type services to be adopted within that 3GPP environment, which is where the standards are set. But 5G is being talked about as being the cure-all for every ill, and it will be with us in earnest by 2020. They'll talk about it next year because the Winter Olympics is going to be 5G, but that's just some kind of radio adjustment from part of it. The full standard is a long way away.
Right.
But they're more focused on IoT and automotive than they are on media.
Good point.
So the work in media is a great foundation. And if somebody wants to get a license and use 5G technology, they can. But in terms of what it will do for you, if you're a terrestrial broadcaster, it's just the same. It still won't penetrate indoors unless you put thousands of transmitters in. I mean, mobiles have 22,000 transmitters in the UK, which is what I know of. The UK DTT platforms, 1,175 transmitters. So that's the difference in scale, but that reaches everybody in the country. Mobile doesn't quite do that, even with 22,000 transmitters.
It was interesting. The CTO of Liberty Global, Balin Nairn, was on a panel earlier in the week, and we asked him about 5G, and he said it's a game changer. But he said, on the other hand, we've got to do a lot to actually build out the infrastructure to make the damn thing work, because and that's cost, and that's something that Balin doesn't like. As a CTO, he's like, let's avoid cost, and let's we can really see the benefit.
I think you'll see more mobile use. The reduction of mobile charges in Europe will help. People will start to use mobile more often. But I mean, it's interesting.
Well, what's going to happen is the telcos are going to come in and bundle the content. They're going to
Sure,
say, hey, man, you get all this great stuff, and by the way, you have to be on our service. So they're going to use content like Facebook is doing. They're going to use content as the driver. That's what's going to get the take-up.
That's a fascinating area. I mean, in the States, you've got T-Mobile, I think, with Binge Watch or something, and now I think 3 have launched it in the UK. Binge viewing. There's another one in Germany, and they're all slightly different models. On some of them, you can pay to be part of it. So if you pay, you'll be in the bundle. On other ones, you have to be, they have to be open. Depends what country they're in. So they're trying different models in different territories to see what works. But at the end of the day, they're burning a lot of bandwidth unicast to get to people. And that's fine while you've got small numbers, but it won't do 10, 15 million simultaneously.
And should we take 2020 as the starting point?
The start.
Because quite frankly, I still very often get just 3G on my phone, not 4G. So, so assume that 2020 isn't going to be the point where we're saturated with 5G.
It's probably the biggest hype at the moment, 5G, and I think it will be talked about for many years to come. You won't see it in mass market devices for a couple of years after 2020, I think. But it will be beneficial if they can afford to roll it out.
It also has to do with advertising, John. I mean, you know, Niko can talk about this. The mobile advertising, it's just video advertising is going to mobile. I mean, that's where it's going. I mean, there was some Zenith came out with a figure. It says $18 billion by 2018. You know, it's just and it's doing like this. You know, it's like so. I don't know. I mean, that's if you get into monetization.
Do you have a view on this?
Well, we even have a whole company just based on mobile advertising, which is Snapchat.
Right.
I mean, Snapchat was developed so that mobile advertising would have more impact than conventional ways of showing ads on mobile phones. So definitely, the one thing that I think we always need to remember is also the location data attached to the mobile phone.
Oh, right.
And that will allow us really to target not just target groups, but also people at certain points in time based on where they are. And we will need a lot more ads, a lot more powerful ads, a lot more creative output to be able to make use of that incredible new system that we're building now, 5G, 4G, whatever. But the location data, I think, is a key in there. Yeah,
it's certainly working, because I can tell you that the traffic in this area is normal for the time of day. That always comes up on my phone. So we're definitely being tracked all the time, aren't we? Anyone else got a comment on mobile? No?
I mean, I think from a video perspective, everybody's watching video all the time. So the advertising, I still think somehow, how do we get that advertising put around the mobile experience that it's not, you know, covering up video? Where is it that's going to be able to be clicked on to generate the revenue on the back end for the content producers?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes on YouTube videos, you know, and you like the ads are like right there. Like, how do I get rid of this thing? I'm trying to watch the video.
They've got a great feature, skip ad. I use it all the time.
And you can't always skip them. That's the first problem. Then you have to wait.
Can I just ask Julian behind the scenes to remove that question so some more can filter to the top? That would be really helpful. Okay, although we've touched upon it, this is a very close second in terms of votes. We need to come back to AI, and people are interested to hear a bit more about that. And the specific question is, and I think we have touched upon it, but let's emphasize it a bit more. How mature is AI for broadcast, and who uses it already, how and why? So, Simon, are you aware of it being...
I've only really seen demonstrations of what's been done with the big cloud providers, and in that case, I've seen examples of promo editing, for example. So I think the tennis recently did the thing with Watson, which I mentioned earlier, but I think Microsoft showed us something where they'd taken a trailer on a fire department video and they'd cut out the highlights from it, you know. Were they the highlights? I have no idea, but you know, then others say that it just generates a list of highlights and editor still has to put it together. But I think that automation will be beneficial. But there's also the story about the AI, was it yours or somebody else's, where the two AIs started to work independently of the human operatives.
Right.
And basically they started to invent a simplified way of talking to each other. So instead of saying, I want 3 of those, it was 1, 1, 1, I want. You know, effectively.
You seem to want to.
Well, so, you know, it's interesting. So Google, what's called TensorFlow, that is the machine learning that Google open source. So anybody trying to get into machine learning, it's out there, right? You can go start to learn about it. What as I learn more and more about it, you know, you kind of have to have your own data scientists almost on staff if you're going to go build your own algorithms.
Right.
Very complex, you know, you have to work with teams and figure out the content I have, how am I going to analyze it, what do I want to do, what do I want out of this data, right? Because that's what we're trying to figure out. So then trying to make it easier to consume for vendors, broadcasters, anybody out there, there are APIs now to to start to train those models in just a normal way. So like the video intelligence APIs that are available, they're looking for shot scene detection changes. So as soon as you can have that automated, then you can quickly put together highlights and somebody doesn't have to watch all the content. Where I hope the ML and the AI and being able to do quick edits and things like that help is, let's say a sporting event, you take a piece of that content, push it to social, because we're all thinking social.
Sure.
I don't think social is going to be, I think you mentioned it earlier, where we go watch our half-hour video. But can that be the new advertising medium to get you hooked to come back and watch that content? If you can have machine learning, let's say it's a football match and you have cameras now on every single player. Well, one player might be my favorite player, but he might never be in a play or something, but he might be, you know, still moving around, very interesting. If ML could, as a match is going on, be creating unique highlights on everybody, and I want to go see a highlight on somebody, I might be able to see that on social and go, oh, this looks interesting, you know, and boom, I'm back over on the game, watching it, and consuming it and either paying it for paying for that either through a subscription that I have. Like last night I was trying to watch a American football game back from home and my provider didn't allow it to be streamed, so I couldn't actually see it. But that's where I see machine learning really starting to create new things for us. Yeah. I tell everybody I hope it doesn't take away the editor's positions. I hope that it allows us to edit more content, to distribute it to more people so that more people get a flavor for it and then can come in and consume it.
Let me stick with you, Kip, because there is a related question here, which I suspect you're the right person to ask. In terms of AI, it's what about AI security? Mishandling of training data may have a drastic effect on the AI system. So you could, if you have a bug in your algorithm, I guess, you could have consistently wrong results. Is that what this question is saying?
It probably is, yeah. So these algorithms, like I said, data scientists are working together on them. From a Google perspective, there's 5 pre-trained ones that anybody can start to consume, integrate into their applications. And some of my opening comments, walking around the floor and seeing how third-party vendors are taking that and integrating it into their technology, you know, is exciting. And then on security, that's kind of a topic we haven't talked about, but DRM on the video streams to prevent them from being able to be captured and then shared on a social site where they have not been shared really does seem to be a theme. Everybody's asking, you know, how are we going to encrypt the stream? How can we put the DRM on it as well? So, and it seems like the 3 big, you know, there's Widevine, Play Ready, and Fair Play, you know, to protect your content to make sure that where it is where you want that content to be. But on the AI, I'm sure if, you know, those variables get in there incorrectly, of course, you know, what kind of data you
systematic
get out is not going to happen.
So my company has 160 data scientists around the world, and we're increasingly being asked by our clients, can you please check whether we're doing the right thing with our algorithms? And I think, so I think the key here is, and I think, you know, Kip kind of mentioned that too, is that the trickiness here is not the AI technology itself. This is software that's widely available. It's about applying it right, and what are the questions that you're asking from it, and what are the data sets that you have to make it competitive, you know? So that the AI itself, that's not the problem. It's what you do with it. That's
are you asking the right questions? So let me, again, sticking on the theme of using some of the comments from the floor and edit, come to you. I mean, let's talk about user-generated content. We're a sort of democratized world. We said everybody can make video. Is this changing the face of the industry, or are big brands still going to proliferate?
I guess there's a couple of different questions in there. I would say that certainly it's not a trend that I've observed on the show floor of user-generated content really being a big theme of this show. I mean, obviously you have the slightly different use cases in terms of how UGC is accessed and comparing that to broadcast. What you are seeing is it being integrated into a sort of wider content search. So let's say you're searching for content and you know, you're looking across your VOD or you're looking across your linear. You can also be looking across your YouTube or searching more generally. But I think it's a different different use case in terms of how people are watching it. When you say big brands proliferating, are you talking from the context of
are they still going to be the go-to organizations once
when you
there's
say
so much
brands,
stuff?
you mean who? Like
Broadcasters?
People that you've been interviewing over the past week or so, the big names in the industry. Do you? I mean, maybe that's a question to you, Kate. Do you think they've got the answers to stay relevant? These big brands in the industry.
Okay, so like the big broadcasters.
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah,
Well,
sure.
certainly, I mean, one of the early keynotes was with Modern Times Group. Modern Times Group is a Scandinavian broadcaster that's doing a lot of very interesting things. They are in a market that's been highly competitive. You know, they've had Netflix come in. They've got high, vast mobile penetration. They've got fiber penetration at a high level. So they're having to rethink how they think about broadcasts in that sense. And so they've moved not only into doing a lot of VOD and catch-up, which is a vibe. They have a product called Viaplay, but they also have moved into other kinds of things. For example, e-sport, which is, you know, basically gamers playing video games. So it's a sport, but it's not as a sport like, you know, football or something like that. But it's huge. And of course, for this newer generation, it's the younger generation, they love it. And they're very engaged by it. And it's, you know, there are live events. They're doing all this stuff and they're streaming it, blah, blah. So they're moving into that. They're going into gaming. So they are trying to remain, MTG, are trying to remain relevant by basically transforming their business into something broadcast plus. You know what I mean? In other words, yeah, they'll sell off some of them, and they've actually done this. They've sold off some of their businesses that are more legacy-type businesses in markets that are more peripheral to their business, sold off some pay TV operations in Russia and Czech, which aren't really, you know, core to their business, in order to fund this move into other businesses. So, you know, I think to answer your question, there will be some broadcasters that will get it, and some that will not get it.
Right.
And I think in some ways it's almost a harder question for your members, for the public broadcasters, because they have a different kind of remit that they have to figure out how that's going to work in this new, very competitive world. Yeah. So I think, you know, the pressure is more on them in some ways than on some of these more commercial organizations. But, you know, you've seen commercial organizations mess it up. I mean, you know, look at Canal Plus has had a terrible time trying to figure out what to do next. Yeah. So it's, you know, it's not easy, let's put it that way.
So, Simon, actually, we're working you hard, but I was going to come on to you because two things that I heard at this IBC which are relevant to this. Firstly, there was a presentation from RTE where I may have mentioned this already, that they made the comment that they managed to equip 10 news crews with low-cost technology, whereas before they would have only equipped one. Yeah. And then I've also seen at this IBC some broadcasters, at least, talking about embracing user-generated content as part of their mix.
Well, I think, you know, if you look at something like Periscope, which no one talks about anymore, but, you know, that was fantastic, but it went on Apple TV, and I skipped through a few Periscope channels once, and I got about 3 preachers driving to work and going, hey, I believe in this, do that, follow this, you know, and I go, what the hell is this? So, you know, okay, but some amazing event like a rock concert, you can get the map and see where people are at a concert and showing the footage from it. It's never more than a few seconds, but it's a bit of fun. That's all great, and maybe it's got relevance in some kind of youth program, you know, which people want to show it in. And I think, you know, it makes it very easy to put content like that onto shows, but you don't see that much of it anymore. We've been doing user-generated content for years now. You know, I remember having a platform that did it once. We had a tornado in Birmingham, you know, would you believe it? But, you know, that was submitted by the viewers. They said, look, it's blowing down the taxi line. And, you know,
yeah, but I think it's how you define user-generated content. I mean, you've got, you know, channels with, you know, PewDiePie and these people that no one knows the names of, you know, Dan TDM. Are they user-generated content? Well, yeah.
But
I mean,
they're promoted, aren't they?
But now they're, you know, part of bigger machines. They're starting to figure out, you know, are they going to become TV stars? Is Zoella going to do her own cooking show on a quote regular TV channel? Well, yes and no, because actually where they are right now on YouTube, they're actually they've got a lot of viewers. There's a whole generation, you know, your son included, who watches those kind of people and doesn't think that the main stars are, you know, Graham Norton or whoever it is on television.
Hip.
And I think it all comes down to the interests. Like you said, I mean, when I look at social or a lot of it, you look for a couple seconds and it's got to be interesting content, which goes back to it's just where is that interesting content? Did somebody find it on a YouTube channel or are the big broadcasters still providing the content that we want to view?
Right.
And I think it's just now there's more platforms to find that content, but it has to be interesting content. I've seen drone footage over, I live in Denver, Colorado. The mountain's absolutely gorgeous, but if you don't put a story to it, it was like, okay, that was really nice, and you're not going to look at it again. So the stories are still what we tell, whether you're a personality on YouTube and you attract the users or the viewers, or watching it on the nightly news. It's still that story has to be there.
Storytelling is the most important thing.
Sure. So I'm not going to apologize for jumping around the subjects because it's what the audience is driving in many ways. So the next question is moving back towards advertising, and the simple question is, will broadcast ad revenue be as big as it was in the past 5 years? So is the money still there in advertising? Niko, you could probably have a first stab at that.
I mean, that's two different questions, right? I mean, the one about the size of the broadcasting industry and the other one the size of the advertising pie.
Absolutely.
So I think that the advertising has been growing. Digital advertising has been growing. It's now equal about more or less to TV advertising budget. And so I think it will continue because there's still so much innovation that can happen around it, as we said before, reaching the right people in the right point of time, etc. Whether broadcasters are going to still benefit from that to the same extent, that's the real question.
Right. That's the real question.
I think, having worked for a broadcaster who used advertising a lot, if you want to launch a brand and you can hit potentially 26 million households in a country with a TV advert for a new car or a new beer or whatever it might be, you'll do that.
That's getting less and less now, Simon. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but then
these audiences, these mass audiences are starting to do this.
Well, they're reducing, but they're still bigger than you get online in one hit, and you get it very short period of time, and they do that. Then they market it online, they're on Facebook, they're on every platform they can get on. And
I mean, one way to answer the question is to look at somebody like ProSieben. They have diversified into all kinds of business models. They're doing a lot of e-commerce, for example. So they're not just advertising. So if the smartest broadcasters are diversifying into new business models, it does show that there is a certain expectation that advertising placed on broadcasters is going to decline, right? So we need other revenue sources.
There's a question of trust as well. I mean, a lot of the digital advertising came for a hammering earlier this year when it was actually associating itself automatically with content that you wouldn't want to be associated with. And I think the industry as a whole, the digital industry, has to sort that out because people are pulling away from that kind of automated advertising placement as quickly.
Actually, that does loosely tie into another question here, which has risen to the top. I mean, it's the consumers are an innocent party in all this. You're taking data from them,
the innocent
using
party.
it.
The consumers have the power now.
They have the well, this I think is the point of the question. As data privacy becomes more important, the idea of individuals owning and managing their own data, is investment in consumer intelligence misguided? Could it backfire? So
could it backfire? If we're constantly bombarding, as we have all these great algorithms that know exactly what I like and what you like, if we're just bombarded with the same information over and over, I think it's going to force us to go find a different channel or find something else because you don't get the diversity of ads and you don't find out, oh, there's this or that because it's getting so targeted. So that's, I think, it's going to swing this way where it's going to get targeted, but then I think some of the randomness is going to have to come back in to make it interesting. Because you've all clicked on something and then the next 15 ads are exactly that, right? So I think it's going to be interesting. I think
do you feel this randomness needs to come back in?
I'd also actually just like to, I think in the spirit of the original question, it's important to mention some of the legislation, so particularly the GDPR, which is obviously going to be coming in Europe in the next year or so, actually slightly less than that. And this is going to force operators, particularly when trying to get consumer data, to effectively have consumers opt in rather than just taking their data, and actually to they're debating exactly how to sort of spin it, if you like, to consumers. But effectively, what it's going to come down to is you have to explain to consumers what you're using their data for and get their permission to use it to a degree. There are certain ways around it. It'll be difficult to enforce that you have to ask for every single use, including future uses that you may do. But that's a pretty critical part of the privacy discussion. Is actually, will you be able to get the data from a large enough and representative sample of your audience to then be able to analyze it, and how will these audiences deal with the GDPR?
That's great, because you've kind of answered one of the other questions, was about, is regulation catching up with the sort of use of this data?
I mean, as a consumer, it's a fantastic piece of regulation. I think from an industry perspective, it's going to cause issues, because we're now at the level where we want that data and we're all talking about it, but we've suddenly just had this, not bombshell, but this new legislation come in that's going to affect that.
Something I heard about from the EU, which I don't know whether it's true or not, but what I read was that somebody's passed a ruling somewhere that's filtering through the system that says that if an AI system has decided whether you should have insurance or not, then maybe the staff that work at the company won't know why a decision was taken, and they're trying to make it so that you have a traceability to that, so you can ring up and say, hey, you've refused insurance, who made that decision? And if it was an AI system, how did it make that? What were the steps it took to decide that?
Yeah, there's some scary stuff. There's some scary stuff going on, because if AI takes over and starts making decisions like that, then we, where's the, you need the human touch, and if and suddenly you're at the end of this data pipe and this machine, and you talk about not knowing who to call now. It'll be worse than trying to get somebody to tell you how to fix your airline reservation when the wind blows. It'll be some machine somewhere. So I think that's a really important point, and how that data legislation gets through. Whether the regulation's catching up, I don't know. I mean, I think regulation always is a little bit behind, because it has to be more reactive, and it's very, very difficult because things are happening so quickly, and also we have these different mentalities. I mean, the U.S. approach to data and the European approach to data are quite different. So
that's true. And
so let me again change tack and completely and get onto VR. Total mind shift immediately, because we've got to get through these things. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen much of the floor, but clearly last year VR was a buzz. There've been, I think, conference sessions, Kate, on VR here. Has it got traction this year?
Yeah, Rickard Streiber was here from HTC Vive, and he did a big thing on VR. But what was interesting was he talked about VR, but he also talked about AR, and he talked about he talked mixed reality. And basically what he was sort of saying is, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, and many people have also said it's probably AR first, VR second. It's like, it's the headset is the problem. I mean, it's the advantage, and it's also the problem. It's expensive. It's isolating in the sense that you want to be isolated because you want to have a full VR experience, but you've got this on as opposed to being in the living room talking to people. So I mean, somebody asked a very funny question. They said, well, people multitask. I mean, when I'm watching television, I'm on my phone. I've got my thing, and you can't multitask if you got this darn thing on. So it was funny. Ricard at one point said, well, we're coming out with this thing where you can just flip a switch and you can actually see. So when somebody hands you a glass of wine, you can actually pick it up. What a good idea! So I think, I mean, yes, it's interesting and it's happening, but I don't think that. Last year was like hype.
Yeah.
This year, and then one more thing I'll just say, Brian Sullivan was so funny. He was asked about it, and he said, well, I was a proponent of 3D, and look where that got me. So he says, I'm not making any, proposition.
Hesitation.
There was a hesitation about saying VR,
yeah.
But what do you think?
Ed, we're all consumers as well, so what's your take on VR?
What we're seeing from VR at the moment in terms of sort of talk, I would say, is more towards the user-generated side, actually. So sort of seeing, say, Google and Facebook, with their proponents in terms of, okay, how can we capture VR, and then you might sort of watch a 20-second clip or a minute clip. Here's what happened here. Here's me immersed within it, rather than from a professional production standpoint, where actually capturing VR.
That's interesting.
It has the same problem, I suppose, that 3D had, which obviously if it does well is not necessarily a problem. But in 3D, unlike with 4K, you have to capture twice. So you have to both capture from a 3D perspective, and you had to capture from a standard HDR.
There were attempts to bring them together, but it doesn't really work.
And with VR, you obviously have the same issue. You then also have issues potentially of bitrate as well if you were trying to stream that. So, I mean, I think from a professional standpoint, I certainly haven't felt like at this show. I think it was introduced last year. It will bubble away for a few years, and then will become, I'm sure, if we're doing this.
So that's a very good point, because as the industry is driving for efficiency, that's breaking the efficiency apart when you've got to do things two different ways to get content.
Yeah.
Let's just go round. I'll come.
Okay.
Let's go right round the group.
So it's interesting that everything ends in R, but I mean, there'll be another one next year. But VR, I think our members are doing experiments with it and finding interesting things. And I think it's time to let the storytellers tell the stories and make something exciting and cool about it. I think AR, I think we're a bit more excited about. Maybe it'll lead to lighter devices because you'll have to pass them around and look at things and characters will appear. And I think it'll be great for kids' programs and that sort of thing. It's going to probably change things quite a lot, but you need some good quality 3D graphics now, so post-production will come back.
Right.
And MR, again, tremendous data rates, but 36 cameras looking at an 8-foot diameter circle with somebody standing in it. As long as you can do everything you need to do in an 8-foot circle, you're in. But you know, we saw a virtual room, you know, and you had the headset on with wires coming out the back and somebody to guide you around. And as you look underneath the 3D objects, it's all great. And then a virtual video character appears. But they can't interact. They're in their own circular space, and they can act at different times and make it look like reality, but it's not quite. So there's a long way to go, but I think that's very exciting, the MR, in terms of storytelling. So the quality's better.
Do you want to turn it around a bit for us?
Well, just, you know, online, watching some of the videos now where people are, the regular broadcast is going on, but they have a you know, VR camera, and so you can go click and look around, and I think it's cool. I just think it's a novelty right now, and people are trying to figure out how to use it. You know, YouTube announced VR 180 so that you don't look back and see the director and all the production crew. So I think, does that catch on or not? Yeah, you know, we'll just see. But those are with 360 when all of a sudden you turn around and, you know, there's nothing there. So, so I think those two.
Ignore the people behind the curtain.
Yeah, exactly. There they are. So I think VR 180 could be interesting. The 360, how people start to implement it online, where you're watching a video and then you realize, oh, I can click on the video, spin it around, and see what's going on the other side. Yeah. I thought it was pretty interesting. I was looking at some last night, like race car. You know, there's a race car. They stuck one on. So, you know, normally you would just see it going forward, but you could just click on the video and see what's behind them too. So things like that, I think, will become interesting.
So are you a VR user, Niko?
Not at all, not at all. So I'm wondering, does it really make content more compelling if you ask a CFO of a media group, okay, you have $100 to invest, how much would they invest today in the, it's interesting, but it's not going to save anybody right now. I mean, there's a lot more important investments that have. You know,
the CTOs are going to invest in HD. You know, they're not going to invest in a lot of VR. It's, you know, they have to be there, but not big time.
Well, there has to be new content as well, because if you think of the content that really sells for high value, like, do we think that House of Cards would be improved by me transporting myself into the scene? Probably not. But, you know, we can think of use cases. They're just different and new ones. You know, it would be interesting if my friend's on holiday to see, you know, the entire panorama of where they are.
I think it's mostly documentary. I mean, you know, if you were with, you know, I don't know, at Attenborough under the sea, and you could go do a look around, you know, wherever you wanted to and see what fish you wanted to see, that makes sense to me. But no, not in a drama, because you know, if Kevin Spacey's, you know, doing something, you want to watch him. You don't want to be watching behind him.
Again, maybe a new form drama, but it just means that has to be created, or a new style has to be created. It's not instantly transposable onto what we currently consume.
So. There's one question that's just amused me, which is really off topic, but someone said, was it some kind of algorithm, or was it a person that removed my question from the list?
That was a person.
Me, guilty. I thought we'd answered your question. I'm sorry. So another question that's risen to the top is one, and I don't think we've done this one justice yet, is the interface to the consumer. There's a question here about the interface, you know, navigating around all these options.
Well, I think that the you know, the user interface, it won't be like the kind of UIs we're talking about now. And I heard a couple of times on this platform that people are thinking that how people interact with content, or whatever that user interface is, voice activation, whatever it is, that's going to become much more important than price. It's going to become much more important than product. That actually becomes the most important thing and the differentiator. I mean, think about even when Netflix launched, how when we first got it, we were thinking, oh, this is so cool. Like, you can do this. And boy, it remembers me when I, you know, come back. Hey, Kate, you want to see the same, you know, start in the same place you were before? I said, boy, my TV never asked me that. That never asked me. So I think, and voice activation, I think, moves it to a completely new level. This idea that you can say, Alexa, show me Game of Thrones. Boom. I mean, wow.
So I think that is a difference from this last year to this year, isn't it? That voice activation has become more serious. You're nodding there, Niko.
Sure.
I mean, interface is absolutely, user experience is absolutely essential, and companies that get that right definitely will have an advantage.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Kip, you're very much into user interface.
And for a little while on user interfaces, I was thinking, well, you're going to have an app to go watch everything. But I think then the good user interfaces are going to be able to pull it back together. You're in there and you're going to be able to search your content and find it, so that those apps that can pull the content you want to see and have that great interface is what I think the apps that are going to win and attract you and keep you on that site.
I mean, we had a couple of sessions on designing user interfaces, you know, and it's this idea of the grid. Is it really going to be the grid? You know, how do we move beyond the grid and the mosaic channel and all that kind of stuff that we've been living with for, I don't know, decades? And I really think that voice is the differentiator. I mean, the idea that you can actually talk to something, some AI something, and get something is amazingly liberating. Now, it's also kind of scary, because it's like if you ask Alexa for something, Alexa's going to give you what Amazon wants to give you, right? Not what Sky wants to give you, or what Canal Plus wants to give you, or what MTG wants to give you. Or if you ask, you know, Google, Siri, they're going to, so
or even a partner that they partnered with behind, right? Over in the US, Google and Walmart are partnering together.
There you go.
Does user interface something?
Yeah, I was going to say also, I think there's a couple of key things that are happening which will help towards that. I think number one is you need to be able to search across all your content, and there's moves towards that. I mean, no matter how you search, that's critical. I think number two is you need to be collecting data. You know, again, we're back in the data discussion, but you need to be collecting data on how people are using user interfaces, because that's ultimately how you'll be able to improve it. So there's a lot of data being collected on where you're clicking or how long you're taking in terms of how you're navigating between content. And I think voice is then great in terms of actually the layout, because voice gives you the subtlety to a degree. You know, the subtlety of not having to do 18 clicks to get from A to B, but in case of being actually able to interpret what you're saying, you can then remove a lot of the steps that you have to go from going from A to B to C to D. You can just leap from A to D, provided that
we should not forget that user interfaces can't be copyrighted in the same way that software code can be copyrighted. So, you know, since Lotus Notes and Microsoft, you know, you can draw inspirations from the best things out there and just do it yourself, right, and copy it. There's no problem. So I think that's why, you know, where's the competitive advantage in the future? It's probably more in the data and the compelling content. User interface, we shouldn't forget about it, absolutely essential, but we can draw a lot of inspiration from everybody.
That's a good point.
Okay, coming back to an earlier contention, and it relates to something here. Is there resolution fatigue? Is 4K UHD as far as we need to go? Or is there any motivation to go to higher resolutions?
I'm happy to start this one off.
You start this one off.
I can completely conceive that in a few years' time there will be 8K TVs sold. Quite a lot of them, I suspect, given how the TV uptake happens. And I can completely conceive that there will be 8K content produced, because capturing content in higher resolution, certainly for really high value content, is great for the editing process. So even today, you might capture something in 8K and then shoot it down to 4K or HD in terms of how you want to crop and control that image. What I struggle with is the bits in between every step, from having some content that may have been shot originally in 8K to getting it to the TV and the
And will it be a mass market? Do you really think HK will be a mass market?
No,
I don't.
I don't think so. I mean, the other thing that is worth saying, actually, which we've done a little bit of looking into this, if you try to work out the point at which viewers can detect the difference in resolution, at 4K you need about a 60 to 65 inch screen and being about 5 foot away, which is conceivable. Particularly in America, there are actually, that's not a million. I think the average screen size is about 50 inches. I think from GFK you would know better than me, but I think that the average screen size is about 50 inches, so that's conceivable. But if you're getting into the realms of 8K, you're really needing like an 80-inch screen and to be about 2 foot away from it. It's not actually what
that's interesting, because last night at the IBC Awards ceremony, we saw material that was shot for television put on a huge screen. I think football was one example. And I felt quite dizzy watching some of it, because there was so much movement involved that it was quite disconcerting. So there's actually a production thing there that says if you're shooting for an even larger screen, you've got to be careful about your shooting.
I do believe that we may well get high resolution for VR. So actually
that will help VR if we do go to high resolution. Anyone else want to comment on
maybe there won't be TVs left. We'll just have a TV that's our wall, because it'll be so big that you have to shoot
paneling
8K to keep it going.
Okay. Apologies for the questions we didn't get round to. I'm looking at the clock here, and we've just got a little over a minute to go. So a question that this group haven't been primed already, I'm going to ask them just to close is, what did you get excited about at this IBC? What was the thing that most excited you at IBC? So, Niko, I'll start with you.
Data everywhere.
Data everywhere. That's a very clear response, almost as if you rehearsed it, but you didn't.
And I think the start of the machine learning AI and where people are now figuring out how to use it and analyze that data.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's the potential from IP Studio and what we can do with cloud systems that will really change what we can do in the next few years.
That's Kate.
I thought voice activation was cool. I mean, I think there's more to learn about that. So I would agree with data and I'd agree with AI, but I thought voice was very
It's a nice
compelling.
diverse group.
I was going to say voice, but no, I'll leave something different now.
Pick another one.
From a delivery perspective, I'm really interested in how sort of OTT delivery is converging, if you like, on broadcast. So how you're trying to, from an IP perspective, mimic what you might have got from a broadcast perspective.
Yeah.
So seeing some of the live OTT streaming with latency of like less than a second from Akamai, for example, I think it's really interesting how those business models are starting to converge now. And as OTT gets bigger, you want to reach more people, you have to consider slightly changing how you actually deliver. So really interesting.
And it's only the beginning as well. There's a lot more to come.
Indeed.
So, thank you for your questions, and I do apologize if, given the available time, we haven't covered every topic, but I think we've covered a pretty good range of topics this morning. So with that in mind, could you please thank our panel here?
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
And thank you for joining us this morning. I hope you've appreciated the session. Thank you.